Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yoganandaji. This week it's entitled First Things First. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. That expression, first things first, is a piece of counsel often given to students of business techniques. It is the advice of practicality to those who aspire to worldly success. But according to the Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below. That which works best in one level of life is often the best guide to what will work best on every other level. If a person is true to his highest priorities, he will generally find that his other needs are fulfilled naturally as well. This is true certainly in the search for God. One of the greatest sayings of Jesus Christ was this simple sentence in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 6. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Paramahansa Yogananda gave his elder brother Ananta a wonderful lesson in this truth. It was Ananta who had captured him and brought him back from his flight to the Himalayas, described by Yoganandaji in Autobiography of a Yogi. In Yogananda's book, we read how Ananta later challenged him in the city of Agra to pit his divine faith against such practical worldly considerations as the need for earning a living. Fearless before that challenge, the young aspirant agreed to go by train without any money to the nearby town of Brindaban, not to miss a single meal in Brindaban, and to find his way back to Agra without begging and without in any other way asking for help. In one of the most thrilling chapters in the book, Yogananda fulfilled all the conditions of the test. Yogananda continued the account. As the tale was unfolded, my brother turned sober, then solemn. The law of demand and supply reaches into subtler realms than I had supposed. Ananda spoke with a spiritual enthusiasm never before noticeable. I understand for the first time your indifference to the vaults and vulgar accumulations of the world. Late as it was, my brother insisted that he receive Diksha, initiation into Kriya Yoga. As the Bhagavad Gita puts it in the 9th chapter, those who worship lesser gods go to their gods, but those who worship me come to me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
From Whispers from Eternity. My eye fell upon one of these, and then I saw my eye fell upon one of these, and then I looked at the others too, and I wanted to read all of them, but I will go with the first one, which is, Cure my jaundiced vision of duality. I have long suffered from the jaundice of duality. Everywhere pale matter distorts thy living presence. Wilt thou heal my sight, that with the eyes of wisdom I behold thy presence only everywhere? Master's words are so powerful and so stirring. They just written with his consciousness of God, with his fearlessness, as we heard of in the reading relating to Autobiography of a Yogi. It's just thrilling, and it always holds before us the example of what we can follow. And as we were talking with some friends yesterday, Master always provides the counterexample to the sort of wishy-washy, well, everybody has to be this way, and of course, you can't be super strong, you're only human, and come on, don't be too high in your aspirations and all that. It's not really possible in this imperfect blah, 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 blah. You see, there's always that voice, even just within ourselves. And I'm not blaming anybody for talking that way. That's their business. If we have anybody to be frustrated with, it's with ourselves for listening to them, for giving their words, or such words, any credence at all. It is a reflection of our own doubt, which again is understandable because, as Master said, one of the reasons why it's so difficult to rise spiritually is because of the accumulated memory in our subconscious of our past lives, of where we've come from. Not even just our past lives in different human bodies, but even in the bodies before that. There's this reaching up to what we want to become, but dragging this accumulated weight in the form of memory and habit of where we have come from. And so we want to rise above that. We want to let go of that. As Master said, what has happened in the past, forget it. It doesn't belong to you. You see, it's wonderful the way he puts it. He doesn't say forget it because there's nothing you can do about it now. He doesn't say forget it because it's not half as bad as you think if you really knew how bad it was. No, he doesn't say any of that. He says forget it because it doesn't belong to you. It's such a thrilling thought, really, to just be reborn in this moment going forward, with the great advantage that at this moment in our lives we know that we are seeking spiritually. We know that we want truth. We know that we want God. And so we don't have to wake up again in a new body and figure out how many legs we have in this body and how to use them and where does the food go and so on. No, we have all of that mastered well enough. And so we have to work on finding God. We already know what's important to us. And this is really the one of the points of this topic today. First things first. It's really essential to look at life according to our first principles. It's funny, that phrase, having one's first principles. What does it even mean, first principles? We hear it in regards to business, and we'll come back to that later. But also, we hear it in regards to philosophy, science. Science first principles, you could say, are just taking the measurements of weight and distance and time. Just those three things in measuring. In measurement have produced all the understanding of this physical world around us. I remember, I think it's energy, potential energy or kinetic energy is measured in kilogram meters per second squared or something like that. I mean, it's ridiculous when you think about it. What is a kilogram meter? But it's amazing that something so something so simple, so fundamental, we have built up all of this understanding. I say understanding, not truth. The energy was there before we knew what to call it. The life was there. All these things were here. We've just found ways to express it in language and to think about it in a particular way that makes sense. And that's useful. But it doesn't create the reality. It only observes the reality and gives us something to talk about. In mathematics also, we talk about fundamental principles, starting from, for example, in Euclidean geometry, starting with axioms and definitions and postulates that, for example, two parallel lines never meet and so on. And statements, in other words, that we just have to accept without proof. And from that, so many further conclusions can be developed. And this is true in other areas of mathematics as well. But why is there a need for first principles? You see, in fact, there was a concerted effort on the part of scientists, on the part of mathematicians, and I'm sure on the part of others, psychologists too, in many fields to get down to the fundamental principles. In physics too, there's a desire to find a unified field theory, something that can explain everything, the one theory of everything. Of course, we ourselves already know, at least abstractly, the one theory of everything, God. But to be fair, people are looking for something also more specific in their minds. And as I said, we should not, or as I should say, we should not hesitate to face the challenge. As Dharmini read in the Hermetic doctrine, as above, so below. Meaning, if something is true on one level of reality, it is true on many levels of reality. We should see. And if it isn't true on many levels of reality, we should understand why, or maybe suspect that it isn't even true in the first place on any level of reality. In this case, this master said, taking a brief aside for a moment, this concept of, Swamiji said, applying this to business, that first things first, we have to look at the bottom line and business and so on, that if that is true, that it lets to see if it's true on other levels. And Master said the laws of spiritual success and those of material success are essentially the same. For example, the need for concentration, the need for energy, the need for willpower, the need for persistence, the need for courage and taking risks. All of these things bring us success in many fields, and in fact in every field. If you have to remember only one thing, remember concentration. With concentration you can go all the way. But to now come back to this need for first principles. Why do we even care? Why do we have to find first principles? We have enough principles. Why do we need first ones? Well, it is helpful to try to understand where things have come from, to see what can I rest my knowledge on or my wisdom on. Where does it come from? What can I rely on? How can I say I know this is true? And so, according to the principles of logic, which governs all of these sciences and their rationalization, yes, they want to say, well, I know that A implies B, and so, but how do I know if A is true? Well, does something imply that A is true? And we go back all the way to the beginning, the first statement. And that, if for that statement, we can't say if A is true, then B is true, but nothing implies that A is true. We have to just say A is true. Why? Because it's true. Because otherwise we can't have a conversation at all. So we have to accept some things, even in science, on faith. We have to just accept that they're true. And in fact, the word faith is misplaced here because it's actually belief. We just have to say we believe that they are true. Faith is when your belief has been tested, and then from your own experience you can say that it's true. And so, for example, this postulate that I mentioned, the parallel postulate, two parallel lines never meet, well, in fact, they do meet according to certain systems of geometry. If you take a sphere, and don't worry, the mathematical portion of this talk is ending soon, but if you take a sphere and you put parallel lines on it, like the globe with its latitude and longitude lines, you see that, for example, the longitude lines look parallel at the equator in the middle of the Earth, but as they go to the North Pole, they meet, and the same at the South Pole. In fact, this is how spherical geometry works, that you have these two infinity points where parallel lines meet. But it's even simpler than that. If you stand on a road and that goes straight and you look off into the distance, and if it goes far enough, you see that it seems that it comes to a point. Even in art, this is known as the concept of perspective, that you, in order to show depth visually, you have to make parallel lines meet, because that's how it appears to our eyes. Perhaps it's related to the fact that our eyes are round, spherical. But anyway, as I promised, I will stop it there. And so, this idea that we want to have something to base our knowledge on, our first principles, is very important. And it comes from a deep desire to know what is true. Master writes this in Autobiography of a Yogi, that it is not enough for a person to have all of his physical needs met in terms of having enough food to eat and shelter and so on. He writes, wisdom too is a native hunger. It's inborn, this hunger for wisdom, for wanting to know what is true. And we may feel as devotees that, well, I want to know what is true, I want to know what is God, but before I came on to that, I didn't necessarily want to know what is true, and I see a bunch of people arguing with me about spirituality who don't necessarily want to know what is true, but on one level, everybody does want to know what is true. For example, I want more pleasure, some people think. And so that's what I define as good. And so even in that sense, though, there is truth in it. Because for all human beings, all living creatures, they want to find at first pleasure and avoid pain. You know, this is how even animals have been trained to perform certain activities. If they get a treat, and you may think it's barbaric, but isn't it more or less the same with us too? If you do this, you will get a little sweet. If you do this, you will get a little salary increment. Is that any different than just giving a treat to, you know, some kind of a creature to train it to do something? But still, this concept of seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, grows into seeking happiness and avoiding unhappiness, avoiding emotional suffering. We find that just when I have my physical needs met, it's not enough. I still have a soreness. I still have an emptiness in my heart. Or that I've had all my senses gratified, or I have the ability, because of having enough wealth or having not so strong a desire anymore that requires the wealth to satisfy it, I'm still not satisfied. A friend of mine said she got the perfect husband, she got the perfect house, she had the perfect job, and she sat and looked around and burst into tears because it still wasn't fulfilling her. She had everything that she was supposed to have. And it still didn't amount to anything in terms of that emptiness, that longing, that loneliness in her heart. And so we go even beyond this stage to say that we are seeking joy, we are seeking fulfillment, we are seeking God. Because even happiness is still an emotion if it depends on outer experience. It depends on outer circumstances, if it depends especially on other people. It is fleeting. We want a happiness that doesn't depend on anything except God, which is really the first principle. So someone asked Master, who created God? And Master said, many ask that question. It's because they live in the realm of causation, where every cause has an effect, and everything that we observe as an effect must have proceeded from a cause. But he said God is the fundamental cause. He didn't have any need to be created. He already was. And if you say, yes, but why? And we can explain a little more. And then if we say, yes, but why? We say, you go ask him. Okay, find God and you ask him. And from his lips, as Master said, you will understand all these truths. And even better than understanding them, you will experience them. That, in a sense, is really the true basis of how we know anything. We can say, for example, that there is the theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, and so on, and that it's a great breakthrough in science, but how many of us really have experienced that? In fact, it wasn't even until this was observed, light was bending around another star or something like that, that there was the scientific verification of Einstein's theory. I promised no more math, but I didn't promise no more science. And so that even then, I don't know. I haven't seen light bend around a star. I wouldn't even know what to look for. I've just heard that smart people have said so I say, yes, 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 sounds good. But still, it's not really based in any kind of direct experience, and until then, we don't really know. We just have to take it actually, not maybe on faith, but really just on belief. Because as I said, belief is tested and then becomes faith when you have seen it by your own experience. This is even what Master said when Ananta challenged him and said, you have to go to Vrindavan. I ask you once and for all to test your vaunted philosophy and so on. And anyway, Master said, instant memory came of all the prayers of mine that had been answered, all the miracles that had come to basically protect him and help him out. And so he said, without a challenge, without a hesitancy to Ananta's challenge, he said, I accept. And his friend next to him, who was going as a fellow victim, Ananta said, was saying, give me a coin or two just so that I can call you in case of disaster. And Master said, Jitendra, I will not proceed with this test if you accept even 1 rupee. And Jitendra said, there's something reassuring about the clink of coins. And so that's always how it is, that I have faith in God, but a little bit of money also set aside, just in case God forgets. And so I'm not here to comment on that, but just to say that when we experience something ourselves, then we can say, I know. At least this much from my experience, I know. I was a science teacher for some time in the Ananda school system, and I learned very quickly. I rediscovered one of the first principles among science teachers, which I later learned from other science teachers, even in other schools. They say, speaking from the point of view of a student, tell me and I forget. Show me and I remember. Have me do it myself and I learn. And it's true not only of science and, for example, playing with magnets and so on and electrical wires and seeing what happens yourself. That's a great way to learn it yourself because you've done it, you've seen it. But also, of course, in yoga. Because yoga is not a spectator sport. It's not something that we watch the other people chanting and we smile and clap along. No, the chanting is meant to be participatory. It is meant to be all of us together because our own hearts need to be opened, and we are the ones to do it. To open our hearts to God. Doesn't matter how your voice sounds. It doesn't matter who's listening because God is listening. And even that another story from Autobiography of a Yogi, when Master was seeing some kirtan group chanting, but as he felt very rajasically, and he said, see how, I forget, but basically harshly, they treat the beloved's name. I think they were chanting to Divine Mother in some form. And quickly he saw Master Mahashaya approaching him. And Master said to him, Sir, how came you here? And Master Mahashaya, Master writes, the saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. And he said, isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds beautiful from all lips, ignorant and wise? And it's such a beautiful teaching, really. Master writes of Master Mahashaya, also a saint who inspired him very much. He said, without a breath of censure he had for the world. Not a breath of criticism, not a hint of critique, of wanting to cut something down and so on. And how do we achieve that? Why should we achieve that? Well, partly because it's a lot more pleasant to be around such a person, and so for the sake of others, even as a public service, we should work on developing that in ourselves. But why? Really for the peace that it brings. Sure, you can say if we're not walking around criticizing everything, this isn't right, you aren't right, that we have more peace of mind. And yes, that's true, partly because we aren't passing that critical energy through our own hearts. In a certain way, criticism or being critical is the opposite to loving. We often understand that hating is the opposite to loving, but that's not a very useful teaching for a devotee, because most devotees, and even most truth seekers, and even most people, how much do they really hate of anything? Usually it's not hate, but annoyance, irritation, even anger, but not hatred. But on the other hand, so again, what use is it to tell us don't hate? I mean, again, first principles, sure, but then what? But criticism. When the heart shrinks, when love withdraws, the heart becomes critical and wants to pick apart and doesn't want to love, doesn't want to accept. It doesn't mean that when we love, we have a blind eye. Swamiji gave so much love to all of us, and you can see that when you see the videos of his talks and so on. You feel it even coming to you, perhaps. But it wasn't from lack of seeing people as they were, but in fact, he saw us as we truly were, or truly are, as souls striving to find God, as devotees, as future saints in the making, all of us, everyone on earth even. As Master said, a saint is a sinner who never gave up And so Swamiji encouraged us too, if we had to evaluate ourselves based on our aspirations, based on what we were striving to become, what we were seeking, our trajectory, in other words, not our current position. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, because you can be low down, whatever that means, but striving for the highest. And on the other hand, someone can be quite high, but just passing time, falling asleep, not really strong in their motivation or their vocation anymore, or even looking down, going, now why did I leave all of that? So again, applying this only to ourselves. How should we judge others? We shouldn't. But in terms of judging ourselves, just say, I want to be better, I want more happiness, I want to be kinder. I wasn't so kind in this moment, so help me to be that. And look at that, where you're aiming, and skip the rest. Now, to come back, this having no criticism gives us peace of mind, as I said, partly because we don't pass that critical energy through our own hearts, partly because also the more we criticize others, the more we invite their criticism. And so as Master said, not regarding criticism, but regarding gossip, he said, as soon as you become interested in others, they will become interested in you. You see, it's just, it's partly cosmic law. And so if we put out kindness, if we put out an aura of even harmlessness, in the sense of not wishing harm on anyone, it creates the greatest protection. And even it says in the Bible, Jesus said, to one who loves much, much is forgiven. And in this case, we could ask ourselves, what do we have to be forgiven of but our karma? And so with a great aura of love especially, a great love especially for God, much of that karmic debt is forgiven. Much of those karmic consequences we are shielded and protected from. This has not only been confirmed by many saints, not only in their own lives and in this wonderful story that we just heard a brief summary of in Master's life, but also it has been true, I think you will see in your own life, that many times God came to the rescue. Especially it's precious for us in those times when we are completely helpless to do anything and still we are spared. Or even we do the wrong thing and nevertheless Divine Mother saves us from ourselves. Or even in a trivial matter that really it wasn't important whether it worked out well or not, and still Divine Mother very sweetly made it work out for us. In those ways we see how we are protected. And that protection is open to everyone. It isn't as if God prefers devotees or gives special treatment to those who are seeking Him. It's just that the more we do seek Him, the more we do love God, the more we open ourselves to receive what He's giving us. Just as it says in the song that we sang, that why barter like a beggar? Why negotiate like a beggar? You have wealth everywhere. And so again, God says, I can give you everything and I want to. Why are you rejecting it? Why do you turn your back to me? Why do you hold the cup of your heart down or sideways or just slightly tilted up? Again, this is not a cause for criticism of ourselves, but to say, the cup is up. The cup is up. That's how I want the cup. That's where it is. That's all I want. And so help me to always do that. So the other reason, though, why we should not want to criticize is not because of the effects of that behavior, but because of the cause of that behavior. When we have so much calmness, when we have so much peace, when we have so much joy, for example, from meditation, from kriya, from chanting and other devotional practices, we're just so contented, we're so full of this joy that then if something bad happens, we barely even notice it. Oh yeah, well, there it is, or it wasn't so convenient that happened, but after all, in this realm of duality and so on, I can allow for a certain number of downs to go with my ups today. You see, it's not that we have to struggle to retain that calmness. It's that calmness is a consequence of that deep inner satisfaction. And so, to put it another way, if we find ourselves critical, we can ask ourselves why. Why, for example, I remember sitting in a Sunday satsang in this was in the Ananda Palo Alto temple, and I was really enjoying the sermon, but the person in front of me was not aware that she was right in my field of view, and she was kind of twitching a lot. This was the day before phones. I mean, so who knows if now people just looking at their phones during a talk out of restlessness, but she was twitching a lot. And it didn't seem to be that she necessarily needed to. I didn't bother to investigate, but I found myself distracted, and I thought, this person is so restless that they can't even sit still during the talk. And then I realized, and I am so restless that I am noticing them. You see? It's just, we can always find a way. If we have something to find fault with, that we can find a way to turn it back on ourselves. With humor, as the affirmation said. Don't think that everything that's wrong in the world is really wrong with you. In fact, Master said that. When you see something that's wrong in the world, remember it's wrong with you. But what he meant was calling it wrong. I mean, what I think he meant was calling it wrong. I mean, it may be wrong. There are lots of injustices in this world, certainly. And those are only a goad, only a prod for us to find justice, to find truth, to find fairness, to find that love that we're seeking. From the one source it comes from, God, nowhere else. Is it that this person doesn't love you because they're not nice, because they don't like you, because they give love to everyone else but not you? No. It is because true love only comes from God. There was a song, "In this world, Mother, no one can love me." Master wrote that chant, but it's translated from a Bengali song, an ancient song, I don't know, but at least 300 years old, I would guess, just doing a little bit of forensic historical analysis. And so 300 years ago, somebody in Bengali is singing, I have an idea for a great song, "In this world, Mother, no one can love me." It's a universal thing. Swamiji was talking about in the 1970s, I think it was, or maybe 1980s. Anyway, some time ago, there were letters discovered in Egypt, in some ruins. Some archaeologists had discovered some ancient Egyptian letters. And there was a letter from the father to a son saying, "While you are away at your studies, you should write to me more often." And then there was a letter from the son, from a son to a father saying, "Send more money." You know, not only how many hundreds of years ago, how many lifetimes have we ourselves been saying to the children, "You should appreciate me more." Saying to the parents, "You should give me more." I mean, it goes on and on and on. So really, what is the first thing that we need to do in this life is to get out of it. That is, that we should understand that the first principle is really the last principle. Escape. Exit. And so from that, meaning to move on to our true home. It isn't that there's anything wrong with this world, but it's not our home. It might be fine to visit the office, but do you want to sleep at the office? Do you want to, take care of the office? Do you expect the office to love you? No, you have a home. That's your true resting place, you could say. And so you have a true family, especially in God. And so we want to seek God. We want to return to our source. We want to get back to our cause. We are sparks of the divine. We are God's children. It's time for us to get home. In the meantime, this world is a good school. It's a good place for us to learn the lessons that we have. It's not that we're trying to get away from something false. It's accepting that this world has its own inherent reality, even cosmic reality, even more than God. That is false. And how often is it? Even Shankaracharya said something, I didn't look it up exactly, but childhood is busy with toys, youth is busy with sex, middle age is busy with work and money, and old age is busy with disease. No one is busy with God. And how many thousands of years ago was Shankaracharya writing this? I remember reading something, an article on the internet that was complaining about the horrible state of writing these days. And it was speaking of English and how terrible people are in their use of grammar and their lack of even following rules of capitalization and so on. I'm sure the same thing could be said of Tamil, of literary Tamil, for example, and versus sort of the commonplace Tamil now and so on. Anything if you want, you can say how much it had degraded. And the article was written in 1981. You see, back then, people were complaining about how bad the language had become. And of course, 40 years later now, people are saying the same thing. So isn't it time that we went home? Isn't it time that we followed our first principles? I'll end with this thought that on a little more of a immediate level, Swamiji said the first principle given to business students is profit. Profit is the bottom line. And even the word bottom line means profit. People will talk about the top line and so on, but the bottom line, profit. Swamiji said, in my life, I have made my bottom line inner peace. And I won't do anything if it will disturb my inner peace. And I will evaluate things according to how will this relate to my inner peace? Will it increase my inner peace? Does it feel right to me? Even if it's a great undertaking, meaning a great challenge, a great risk, even in some ways perhaps dangerous, although we do pray for God's protection, if we're following Dharma, if we're trying to be in harmony, if we mean well, but still, he said he will evaluate it fundamentally according to his inner peace. And so let us do that same evaluation, if it appeals to you, especially as it relates to our own behavior, our own attitudes. Is this person, is this situation disturbing my inner peace? Perhaps. But is my own behavior disturbing my inner peace? Is it really my reaction? Is it really my expectation? Is it really my desire that this be a certain way? If it hasn't been this way for 1,000 years or 1,000 hours, maybe the greater part of wisdom is to expect that it's going to continue in the same way. And the test is not for me to conquer and force it to be a certain way, but to conquer myself and to be strong in myself, to be at peace. So let's, if you feel to, as I say in this week, seek more